Hello, Money Queens and listeners. Welcome to Women Behind the Millions. Let's meet the women behind the millionaires, the women supporting, guiding, celebrating women with their wealth. You will hear from women millionaires, how they got there, what they wish they had known, what got them to be a millionaire, the emotional side, the spiritual side, the practical side of wealth. You'll also get to meet the women behind the scenes helping make it happen. Let's dive into Women Behind the Millions. I am Jessica Weaver, your host, best-selling author of 3 books, wealth advisor, and founder of the Women's Wealth Boutique. Let's start meeting the women. Hello, ladies. Welcome to Women Behind the Millions. I am your host, Jessica Weaver, and we are now on our 4th season. Can you believe it? This is our Rise and Find season, featuring women that cover all aspects of our life, from working, career, financial, to the parenting side. We have nutrition, we have burnout coaches, and I am so excited for this project, for our book, Rise and Find, our newest anthology book at Pink Fix Productions, because, it's really near and dear to my heart, because I feel like I am that reader. I am that woman, that high-achieving woman who wants it all, but also there's guilt and there's emotions, there's burnout, there's the hustle, there's wanting to be at home. And when you're home, you're feeling guilty because you feel like you should be at work. And when you're at work, you're thinking about your kids and feeling bad that you're not with them all the time. I'm off next week for a retreat that we are hosting with some of these amazing CEO female advisors, CEO females in the financial industry, and you feel guilty for leaving. I feel guilty for putting that on my husband to take care of the kids while I'm gone. Always having to say, like, is it okay if I go on this trip? It'll be so great for work, or it'll be great for me to feel fulfilled, and maybe it's personal growth, career growth. So there's a lot that goes into being a woman these days, and especially with today's topic, parenting. And I cannot wait to dive into tonight's conversation with our guest, our expert, when it comes to parenting. And it's such a different time frame. You think of technology, social media, kids, they're growing up so much faster because they have so much accessible information all the time. And you see more and more where both spouses are in the workplace and are working. We have inflation. It's just a very different dynamic these days. So it's great to check in with these kind of experts. And as you ladies know, we always start with a prayer or mantra. And I immediately thought of this one when it comes to parenting. And you'll understand why. Ready, ladies? Allow me, divine, to move with the flow and respond with calmness and peace. I am yours, you are mine, we are one, all is well. For when you think of children, and my kids are now 7 and almost 5, I've learned there are times when you need to go with the flow, because otherwise you might blow a gasket, you might lose your head and your sanity. And to respond with a calmness and a peace, to be that grounding energy in the household. I know there are times when you need to be strict, you need to be disciplined, you need to show your emotions. But for my kids, I've noticed if I'm out of whack, if I'm stressed, the whole household is stressed. We're going to talk about this as well with our expert tonight for it too. So I'm going to hand you that prayer, moms, or maybe stepchildren, or maybe with your parents, right? Even if you're not a mom, you're in probably a caretaking role, taking care of a spouse, your parents, nieces and nephews, you're helping out. That's just how women are. We're just such nurturers as well. But that little check-in of, help me, God, to respond with calmness and peace and ease is what I pray for all of you ladies tonight on the show. Well, with that, let's talk about tonight's guest. We have with us Michele Kelber. She is a founder and owner of Gantry Kids, an independent kids gym in New York City. That's fascinating. Author of How Not to Ruin Your Kids, a practical guide to raising happy, independent, equipped children, and a parent partner consultant. When I heard the title of her book months ago when I first met her, I'm so like, how not to lose a guy in 10 days. Immediately popped into how not to ruin your kids. I think that is one of the biggest fears we have as moms. Am I repeating a cycle that traumatized me growing up? Am I ending that chain? Will my kids need a therapist? Which my cousin-in-law told me, she's like, don't worry, our daughters are going to need a therapist just like we needed a therapist. I'm like, that's true. But with each generation, our goal is to heal more, to raise more healthy, emotionally ready children, and on and on and on. But there's always that fear. Am I doing it wrong? Am I going to mess up my kids for life? Am I doing too much discipline, not enough discipline? All of that. Just the pressure. I mean, ladies, think about the pressure we put on ourselves when it comes to our children. So with that, I'm going to bring Michele onto the show tonight. Hello, Michele. Welcome to Women Behind the Millions.
Hi, thanks for having me.
How are you doing tonight?
I'm fantastic. It's, a new season, school starting, fall, even though it's still summer. But I find them to be an opportunity for, like a reset, like New Year's, but throughout the year. So,
yeah, we have a few months left in the year, right? What do we want to show for it? Having that reset, school starting, it's perfect timing to have this conversation with you because as I'm going through my own list, right? I work, my husband works. He's a first responder. And things that the moms are already on top of, right? The school supply list, the medical forms, the emergency contacts. And he'll chime in, and he's a very, very engaged father. He's an incredible co-parent with me. It's like, that's not even on their radar, not even a blip on their radar. And yet the moms are like on it so fast. So I'm glad we're having this conversation when we're having it because this time frame made me think of it even more and through your eyes after reading your chapter in Rise and Find. But let's backtrack, Michele. You start your chapter in Rise and Find about the women's rights movement.
right.
So let's talk about what has it done for women and what hasn't it done yet for us.
Right. So just as a interesting point, I actually am also a licensed attorney in New York State. So stuff like that interests me to no end, right? Like the Equal Rights Amendment was never passed in the 70s. It finally, 40 years later, got the ratification it needed, and it was still denied. And I've talked to numerous people, and what women's lib and the women's liberation movement has done for women is it's provided people like me who are not married and don't have children equity in theory. Right? So I can have my own credit card and I can buy my own house and I can own my own business and I don't need a man to co-sign my life or make decisions for me. Whereas for people who are mothers and people who work, like it entitled us the right to work, right? But what we fail to recognize is that women who are mothers or wives are already working inside the home. Full-time, 40 plus hours, nonstop, 24 hours a day. So what it actually did for most women is give them more work because now there's this expectation that you're working minimum 40 hours per week. And then you go home to your other jobs where it's not a 40 hour. First of all, there aren't 40 more hours in the week and it's a 24/7 job. So what it's done is it didn't manage or address that issue. And it really left the burden of parenting and homemaking and partnering and supporting, like emotionally supporting a spouse or even making dinner. Like this, there are certain gender roles and expectations that still exist inside the home. And then on top of that, we get this great opportunity to work. So yay, it's like, and it needs to be addressed, because it's 2024 still, almost 2025. And I'm still having conversations with people where there is no equity when it comes to the home. And then, the other conversation is too, that women are not getting ahead in the workplace either. You know, there's equal pay is still an issue. And then being a mother and parenting and a pregnancy is a career destroyer for some.
Yes.
You know, you're not getting the raises. You're not getting the, you know, there are still people, even there are laws to protect us, but they're just not talking about why they're not hiring women. But why they're not hiring women is because they of childbearing ages is because they will leave and have children, and it's an investment that they, you know, some people don't want to make. I shouldn't say everybody. But yeah, so I think it did wonderful things for a lot of us, and it gave options to and expanded options. Like I even look at my own mother. She was a teacher. It was my mother was, it was the 50s when she went to college. I had to think about that for a minute, but it's like, you know, my mother went to college. She got a college degree. She got a master's degree from NYU. Totally didn't realize how unheard of that was for that time. And her choices for a career were probably teaching, nursing, I don't know what else, maybe one or two other options. And like really for her and her peers, marriage was necessary to attain a life or a lifestyle that they wish to have. And those things have definitely changed, right? Like those are options. I think about my mom and her friends and I go, God, they were in their late 20s when they got married in the 60s, which was like, they were spinsters at that time, you know? And it's like, right, they were old and their mothers were like, when are you going to get married? And, you know, I think if they had been given the choice, they would have chose something different for themselves. So I think that the women's liberation gave us all choices, but it also left the burden of parenting and partnering on us as well.
Yes. It's like, almost like you can go to work, but don't change the family dynamic.
Right.
We're going to give you this gift to have financial independence, but don't disrupt how it's always been done at the household level. And you said teacher, nursing, and I thought of secretary.
And secretary, yes. I was like, I know there's some other thing that you could, I mean, you know, yes, or secretary, or yeah, even like, I was going to say like, even like hairstylist, but at that time that was a man. So was a chef. So was any kind of professional, quote unquote, domestic type job was still a man's career. It was not something that was open to women. So,
oh, sure. What got you so interested in then speaking out on this, really being a thought leader? And somebody needs to talk on this. This is really, really important for women. And secondly, before you even go into that, I want to ask you, you talked about how, right, we're not advancing in our careers. There's still the pay gap when it comes to gender, earning less money on the dollar than men for the same job. You talk about this in your chapter 2. We're doing twice as much work because we have to show we deserve to be there while getting paid less and having the burdens at home. They got to be coinciding with each for the reason we're not progressing with our careers, because we're this anchor, these responsibilities at home that's pulling us away, or the fear, if I move to that next role, get promoted, is it going to take away from what I'm contributing at home?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely what is happening. And I think, you know, like I kind of equate this whole thing with child rearing in a sense, like what's happening now. And also like my business is in Queens. So it's like, it's in an urban center. It's in New York City, where like safety is a big thing for people and children. And, you know, like there's limited access to like certain things that kids in the suburbs would have access to. So like, I recognize that parenting in a big city is very different, but the trends are also coming up in suburban and urban areas. Rural areas. And, you know, it's like we have this expectation that kids at a certain age will just be independent, right? It's like, oh, you're 11, you should be able to walk home from school by yourself, or you should be able to do this, that, and the other thing. But in the meantime, we have done nothing to prepare them or practice with them. We have, rightfully so, justifiably so, sheltered children. No one wants to send a 6-year-old walking around, even their neighborhood in New York City. It's like, I understand all of that. But then we have this expectation that they're just going to be prepared. And I think that's why we're also seeing like a lot of anxiety with kids, is because we haven't given them agency or autonomy or responsibility in their lives to do things that when we hand them over this freedom, it's actually more frightening than it is inviting. So it's like, I'm ancient. When I was a kid, like we didn't have cell phones, and it was like summers were like, we got on our bikes, we left, we came back when the street lights went on, like literally. Like I know there's a whole generation of people that like make fun of Gen X, but I'm like, you don't get it. That's what it was like. And like, but we also had a community, right? So my parents, if they needed to find us, they called somebody's house, and then everyone, and the collective community doesn't really exist either at this point. So the same thing with like the women's liberation movement is that we created these opportunities, but yet we didn't work on how it is that we're supposed to manage all of them. And part of it is that we didn't send the memo to the rest of the world that we could no longer do all the jobs. And that in taking on working outside the home, someone else, whether our partner, our spouse, our extended family, hired help, whatever, was going to have to like step up, or these other things were going to have to be put in place. And I think that's part of the problem, is that, we like make these blanket statements and make these big changes in society, but yet we don't actually prepare people or work on the skill set to actually have people be powerful in these new roles. And that, I think, is across the board with so many things that you can think of, Oh,
yeah. Oh, sure. Thank you for explaining that and thinking of the children. That's spot on. And I see, especially with school starting, the anxiety and talking with parents, are they going to go in the bus? No, they have a lot of anxiety, so I'm going to drop them off. And it
just perpetuates it.
Yes. Yeah. We're going to choose a smaller school and slowly get them ready for it as well. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. It's a whole different world. And there isn't that sense of community, that camaraderie with your neighborhoods and neighbors and whatnot. Where too. Let's go. I would love to talk about your book, How Not to Ruin Your Kids. What sparked you to write this?
So I've owned my business, Gantry Kids, for about 13 years. It's been open. I have been working with children since I was 11. So I actually have a family that I grew up babysitting for, who I actually was just with them in Maine on a vacation. Those kids are having their own children. And, so it's like, it's always been a part of who I am. My parents were both educators. It's like, I just grew up in an environment that was, my parents were very progressive for, who the times and who they were, just because they were educated in that area, so it was like, I was exposed to a lot, not realizing that I had been exposed to so many different things, when really the reality was I grew up in a small town in New Jersey. I could have not had to have been, so like being with children has always been a part of who I am. And after working for so long with them, I noticed that like, because like the gym is really like an adventure playground. It's a safe place for kids to have risky play, free play, outdoor time, like just bringing it back to like enabling them to have that self-regulation and growth. So a lot of times I would end up with the kids that were like termed by the school as being like problem children. And really they weren't. They just could not contain themselves for 8 hours, barely moving around, so there were challenges for them, and having them be in an environment where they could truly self-express themselves, like really has created change for them. So like our tagline is building tomorrow's leaders today. And we use fitness and movement as a vehicle for kids to understand that no matter how young they are, they have a voice, they have some agency over themselves, and that they have some control over their life, which is imagine you as an adult having every decision made for you. I mean, that in itself causes me anxiety just thinking about it.
You're helpless.
Right. You're helpless. And that's the experience of these kids. And we don't think about the fact that like they are people. So there is this part of them that we need to like be patient and grow and all that kind of stuff. So what I realized too is that you can have an impact on kids, but who you really need to be talking to also is their parents. Like I have two clients. I have children and I have their parents. And I noticed, I did the book because I see a survey. I have probably parented thousands of children in this neighborhood over the course of 13 years. And I have seen every personality, both in a child and in a parent. And it's funny because you meet the kid and you're like, oh, okay. And then you meet the parent and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Like now I see it.
That makes sense.
But when you live with that and that is your child, you don't actually see that. So I think I have this advantage point where I can see things that when you're in it, you can't. So it's like, so I decided to write this book because there were so many, people started coming to me and asking me questions. And there were so many things that were happening that I just felt like, we have all these resources, but they're segmented. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, I kind of just put together all these other things that I learned. And like, I nerd out. Like, this is like, I've read more parenting books than most parents. I was actually a licensed foster parent for a while. So I took parenting classes. So like things that I've done as a professional that a lot of times parents aren't doing because there are no requirements. And a lot of times your parenting skills are what you got as a child and how you were parented, which may not work for your child, or it may be a cycle that you want to break, so it's like, whether it's good or bad, there's something you want to change about it. So the book for me I actually consider it my love letter to the world, because I think it's both for parents, but it's also for people who are caregivers and provide services to kids, to really see them as human beings and to see how there are very little nuances and things that you can do starting from when they're very young that will actually have them be and grow into happy, independent, equipped children. And I do go into some of the cognitive developmental stages and the social emotional stages, things that like, unless you're in education or are reading a lot, you may not know as a parent. And it's astounding because when you read them, you're like, oh, like most people don't realize that your brain is not actually fully formed until you're like 25 years old. But yet, so especially teenagers too, it's like we have these expectations, and we saw a trend years ago. It's kind of moved away from it a little bit, but where we were applying adult rules to children. So we were arresting 6-year-olds for kissing someone in the playground. Or I remember that was like a thing that was happening. And I'm like, these, they don't know, there's no intent. And it's like, or I hear parents say like, my child was at your camp and they were assaulted. And I was like, okay, like
big word to throw
around. And like, I can assure you that that's not what happened, and also like children, I talk about the fact that like children at a certain age cannot be held criminally responsible for a crime. And most states right now are actually leaning towards that through 18. And it doesn't mean they get to do what they want. They're just, instead of going to jail, they're adjudicated to family court, and it's managed through social work and that kind of stuff versus, because one decision by a kid not knowing what they're doing can really end their life or like, put them on a path. Anyway, so the point is that I wanted a one-stop shop that was easy to read. You can read it in one sitting. I know you're a parent, people are parents and they don't have time for that, but it's like, I'm working on the audio so you can listen to it and it'll be easier. But, and it's also just a way for me to let people know that, hey, like you're not out here alone doing this. Like there is support that is beyond your parents and your siblings and all these other people that, again, with that closeness, sometimes it's hard to take advice and feedback or give support in that kind of situation. So for me, it was really, I've always loved to write, and it was just something that I was like, people need to know about this. And there are spots where you laugh, because, and the bottom line is like, parenting is really hard. And I think we all need to support each other in that journey. And having taken my experience and the vast experience that I had in terms of the diversity of the kids that I've worked with, Like you might read something and go, oh, that's my kid, and not realize like, oh, that's other kids do that. Or, like I've had parents come to me and they're like, do you think there's something wrong? And I was like, there's nothing wrong with your child. Like your child is an outdoor kid and they're going to school in New York City. Like that's not a good match. But like, okay, you can't move. So like, what can we do about it? So it's like you put in place other things that can support your child's growth in a way that is needed. And it's like, and listen, I'm not saying anything about anybody. I think teachers are doing the best that they can as our administrators with the tools that they have and the authority that they have. And the same thing with parents. It's like, I am not passing judgment on anybody. I'm extending a helping hand.
That's a beautiful way to say it, Michele. You brought up the cycles, talking about with parenting cycles. I see the same thing with money because we're not taught any differently in school. Usually it's getting a little better. There's not a finance course or a money course, same thing
Right.
a parenting course or curriculum for people to go through. I think I want to become a parent. What's it like? We just kind of jump right into it. Should parents be forced to take classes or curriculums, do you think?
Listen, forced is like a whole other conversation.
Encouraged.
Yeah, I would think that having it available to people is a benefit. I know that a lot of schools have started, like parenting workshops where they address certain things that are going on, or, like for me, I just had a conversation with a group of parents about transitioning because school's coming up. So it's like, how are you, and what are things that you can do to ease the transition? Because like, another friend of mine said, he goes, parenting is 1,000 transitions in a day. And it's true. And it's like, and it's the ones also that you're like, hey, we're getting in the car. We've gotten in the car 1,000 times, but like for little kids, especially, one factor is different. So for them, it's this whole new experience. And it's like, they forget we're getting in the car. Like, we're not going to play in the puddle and do all this other stuff. We're trying to get in the car, so it's like, I think it would be beneficial to people. And I think it would also, in the same respect, it would have parents feel confident and equipped in the choices that they're making around parenting. Because even with, especially for people who didn't have great role models for parenting, they know that way isn't the way they want to do it. But then what is the right way? And the only clear right way is the complete and total opposite, which isn't always the best answer either, so.
Sure. You go from one extreme to the next.
Right. Because all you can see is the complete opposite of what it is that you don't want, so then you're choosing something else, which also is like, and we all fall short, so I think like which is why I've made myself available to do like parenting calls. I have calls with a group of parents every other week, and then I do some one-on-ones with parents, and I've worked with a group of men. Like that's my new, I'm a champion for women and children, but now I'm like really interested in having these conversations with dads. Because I think again, like we didn't give them the memo about what they're supposed to do and how they can be, better parents in light of women working inside and outside the home, so to make it mandatory is like, that would be in theory fantastic, but like the reality is like, I don't want to force anyone to do something they don't want to do at all. So it's like, but to make it available, I think would be astounding.
Yes. That's incredible, Michele. Having these conversations with the men and let the women know, like, let's engage with the men. It's too much on your plate. What are your goals? Where we have the book on how not to ruin your children. And then this chapter in Rise and Find is really about the equitable distribution of parenting, right? Yeah. Evening it out, taking the burden off of it being so much on the mom, maybe bringing help in. And we have another chapter on delegation for the burden out coach, right? That comes into place too. If you both can't handle that extra work, think about me and my husband, like I can't just burden him more, right? And then we need to bring people in to help. So what are your goals, especially with the chapter on Rise and Find, that it's going to spark more conversations, more awareness, get the momentum going? What would you say, Michele?
Right. So my intention with I had interviewed a lot of people for that chapter, and it was something that like really interested me. And I spoke with all different kinds of couples, people who were coupled, people who were uncoupled, people who, the LGBTQ plus community. Like I've talked to like a handful of different people. I talked to some stay-at-home dads, and really got a feel for what was kind of like going on and what the, and the bottom line is this, everybody's situation is different, right? So it's like and the same thing with how not to ruin your kids. It's like what I'm giving is feedback from what I've witnessed. It is not, there's no one way, right? So there's always but there's always something. Like even when I take a course or read a parenting book, if I walk away with 3 new things, I consider it worth it, right? So it's like I may have heard all these other things before, or I might hear it in a new light, or I hear something new. So to me, it's like you pick up any of these books, if you get like 3 quality things out of it, then it was worth your time. Maybe 2 is worth your time. And I just, in being a business owner that deals with kids, I tried really hard to include both parents and to not have it always be the mom just seems to always be the default parent. Mm-hmm. But the problem with that is that if I ask a question of 2 parents, I either didn't get an answer or I got 2 conflicting answers. I didn't really get the same answer in a lot of cases. And then there are certain dads that are the default emergency parent, because we found out after the fact that the mom works in a hospital, she's a doctor or she's a nurse or whatever she is actually not reachable. Mm-hmm. Or the dad works from home and the mom is working somewhere else, or the dad is just more accessible. But the bottom line is most people that fill out or register their child is the mom, like you were saying earlier, that it's not on your husband's radar about the school supplies and the lists and the emergency contacts and the enrollments and all that kind of stuff. It's like the moms are managing that. And I recognize fully, and when I say mom and dad, I mean any kind of couple. Women in general, I think, are very forward-looking, and men are not. They are like in the moment more than we are. But you cannot be in the moment to sign a child up for anything, because your child will not have a space. There will be no space for them if you decide 2 days before soccer starts or school starts that you're going to enroll your child. Like that was done 6 months ago. So it's like I find that the moms are a lot of the people that are registering, and because of that, they are on our list as being the first to contact. So I've tried to rewrite that, and it was unsuccessful. So I think, right. So what I added to the intake form was who is the point of contact in case of an emergency or whatever else. And they will like indicate who that is. The other thing, when I was talking to one of the stay-at-home dads, he said they still, every time their kid got sick in elementary school, they called the mom. Every time he picked them up, he would say to the nurse, by the way, and remind her. He said it did not stop until middle school. And I said, oh, do you think that's because they caught up with it? Or do you think it's because your child could correct them and say, no, call my dad? So we're not sure. It's like a combination, it's a combination of a little bit of everything. But, and so like taking on the equitable distribution of parenting, it was like part of it is within the home. Mm-hmm. And then part of it is also societal expectations. Yes. And the societal expectation is that the mom is the one, which is for some women is great, because I think also because we're running the household and our jobs, we need to be in the know on all of it. But the problem is we're not delegating what we can to other people.
You're right. Very true, Michele. She is incredible, ladies. How about it? Michele Kelber going into parenting, equitable distribution. And we even touched on her being a business owner of this gym for 14 years. That's incredible as well. But stay with us. We have a few more questions for Michele. We are still getting into it with her. We're just going to take a quick break, ladies. Stop playing small, and girl, stop hiding your story. Your story matters. It is a privilege to hear your story, so get out there and tell it. Unlock this remarkable potential of your life story and go on an extraordinary journey towards becoming a best-selling author and a thriving entrepreneur. Just look at some of our financial trendsetters who became a best-selling author, who went on to lead more multi-author anthology books. Donna Cates in Divorce Decoded, a manifesto for women going through divorce. Or Caroline Tannis' Rise and Find, to put together a community that encompasses all of a woman, not just these small pieces of her. Or Camille Roberson putting together a groundbreaking book, Beyond the Broker, for women in the financial industry. All these ladies use their story to build a platform and broadcast it out to the world while building these communities, fostering, nurturing their clients, their relationships, and giving back. All of these book proceeds are going towards nonprofits, foundations, scholarships, to build even more resources out there for women. And that's what we do here at Pink Fix Productions. We amplify your voice, get your story to be told and in the hands of the right audiences. That's how we got you, girl. All right, we are back with Michele Kelber, who is author of her own book, How Not to Ruin Your Children, Not to Ruin Your Kids, and also one of our featured authors in Rise and Find. Michele, we have a few more questions for you. Thank you for being so open and honest, too. Such an intriguing conversation we're having tonight. So, Michele, what would be your Rise and Find tip for these moms, to co-parenting, single moms? What would you say to them?
My tip is that how to be a better parent is highly connected to how to be a more communicative partner. So for me, what I recognized is that it was actually through conversations with a couple of men that I realized, they have their own concerns. And I think that we kind of, they have so much to offer, and in our haste and society, and also women, like in our desire to get things done, we don't actually give them the space to show up sometimes, right? And so what I found in talking to them was, every time they asked me a question about parenting, I was like, well, did you talk to your wife about your concern? And they would start laughing, and they're like, no. And I was like, that's the conversation to have. And it's an uncomfortable conversation. So the conversation is for them to approach their partner with what their needs and concerns are around this, not what their wife or co-parent is doing that has them concerned, or not concerned, but like, questioning or whatever it was. And one of the examples was, there was this, one of the men was out of work, not willfully, and his wife was the primary breadwinner at that point, and also providing for the kids and all this kind of stuff. And he goes, and I'm trying to contribute, and she keeps telling me no, and like won't let me do anything at home. And I said, the conversation is about what you can do to be of value to your family. The conversation isn't about how can you help her, because she will do what she has to do without your help. But if she knew that you needed to do the laundry so that you could feel like you were contributing to your family, that is a different conversation.
Wow. That's a huge difference. Just that different perspective, different language, different way, delivery, I would say, as
right.
Well.
It's a completely different mindset and approach. Because when you offer a woman help, it's like, that's what I say to people. I'm like, your suggestions are just problems. Like, unless you come with me with a solution, like your suggestions are just problems. Like, you're not actually helping me. Well, maybe you should do this. And I'm like, okay, great. But if you come to somebody with a request that's different, and even if you flip it and you're talking about the woman who's working and she's also at home, the conversation isn't, hey, I need you to do this laundry to your husband, or I need you to manage this. It's like, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm going to lose it. And I cannot be a good partner, and I cannot be a good mother, and I cannot be a good employee without some support. And it's like, how many people have those conversations at home? Because a lot of, sorry, go ahead.
And then not enough. We feel it. We're saying it in our head, but we're not verbalizing it to our partner.
And we think that because we're partnered and we're each other's person, that somehow they're going to know. And they will not. I think women have I hate to say it, but I think women have a little bit more intuition when it comes to stuff like that. But it's like, I mean, I have entire conversations in my head about men, and I'm like, they have not thought at all about the things that I've been thinking about at all. Like, we're on two different planes around the same occurrence. And it's like, so I think a lot of it is, instead of trying to figure out your kids, work on your partnership and that communication.
Very good, Michele. Very good. That's incredible. What would you say is the trend that you're noticing? Anything changing in the parenting world?
So what I'm noticing is that a lot of women, I've seen articles about this in the mainstream, a lot of women in their late 30s and early 40s are recognizing that they actually can't have it all. And those of them lucky enough are quitting their jobs. And that is and it's a conversation I had with a friend she was out of work this summer. She's like, this is how I'm feeling. And she's in her late 30s. And I said, well, do you have the luxury to do that? And she goes, no. So it's not something that is accessible to everyone, but it's almost like we're going back to this, it's different because there's a choice. There's a choice to stay at home. In the 50s, there was not a choice. It was just what you did. So it is different, but people are choosing not to work outside the home because it's too much. And because of all these other inequities in the workplace, they're not actually even seeing any kind of fulfillment or payoff, whether it's monetary or promotion-wise or whatever it is. They're not fulfilled in what they're doing. So it's like, well, why am I doing this if I don't have to?
They're working to pay the daycare costs. I see that all the time. I'm in an area in New Jersey. So women who used to work in the city, New York City, once they had one kid, they maybe could do the commute, 2 kids, forget it.
No.
And no choice. They had to stay at home. But they're just having too much burnout. Like, why am I even working?
A lot of burnout. Yeah. And just, I'm glad somebody else is writing about because.
Yeah. Your chapter, the burnout, the delegation chapter, they're going to go right next to each other to re-emphasize it.
Right.
Well, but you're right. It's like, I'm not earning as much as the man who's doing the same job as me. I have just as much work at home as before. So we need to change this if we want any movement.
Yeah.
And we just heard the number of women in the C-suite, so women CEOs, CFOs, CEOs, is on the decline now. And it has to go right hand in hand with this.
And part of that is the impact of the pandemic, right? It's like there was a lot of, like, this one mom, this influencer mom I followed, it became viral that on her resume when she went back to work, in those 2 years that she was at home with 3 kids in an apartment, she put something about that on it. And it was like this revolutionary idea because otherwise women are having to explain why they were out of work. And when I came through some paperwork of my mom passed away like 16 years ago, but she, I still have some stuff that we're going through and all this stuff. And I found a resume of my mom's from 2001 where she had already retired from teaching, but she was looking to tutor kids at Children's Specialized Hospital in Mountainside, New Jersey. And they needed an accredited teacher because these kids were there full time. And I was reading over her resume and learned quite a few things about her I didn't know. But one of the things she did was the time that she left work to raise my brother and I, she went back to work when I was in 4th grade. So she was out of work for 7 years, 8 years. She had that on her resume as being a homemaker and a mom. And I went, wow, you did something that someone is being praised for doing 20 years later.
Yeah, you try to hide it.
And I was like, and then it's like you get to know your parents in a different way. When they were in your face, you were just like, they're just my mom, So it's like, yeah, so there's a lot of, and I think also with parenting too, I just wanted to say that with the pandemic, we were putting Band-Aids on everything. We were putting Band-Aids on things that we thought would last 2 weeks. The next thing you know, these kids are home from school for a year. And like, we're just like trying to get through. And I think now it's been almost 5 years, which is insane because the experience is not that, because we're still trying to correct that triage that we did. And the fact is everyone was doing the best that they could. So there's no fault. It's just, okay, now we still have work to do.
Yeah. And each stage of kids are impacted differently. My son learned to talk during that age. So many kids have speaking disorders, right? Because they couldn't see people sounding out the words.
Yeah.
And then you have the older kids and then anxiety and that's social anxiety. Well, another piece for it too. But we are running out of time with Michele.
Yes.
We can keep talking. Touch on your mother was a teacher. Your father was a child psychologist, right?
Yeah.
Michele, I mean, you got to read her book, her whole book, How Not to Ruin Your Kids, but especially her chapter in Rise of
My chapter, yeah.
On this. So we have one more question for you,
Yep.
Michele. Are you ready for it?
I am.
What makes you a woman behind the millions?
Primarily because I am so committed to women and children and their growth. And who I am behind all that is equity and love. And so I'm an ally.
You are. I love that you said that you're an ally, you're an advocate, this is a big word that's been coming around, you're an evangelist. You are the one who are supporting all of us hardworking moms so that we can find that balance and not feel like we have to settle at home or at work before it. So I can't thank you enough for the work that you are doing and being that trailblazer, paving a path for us forward, because it needs to change. Because again, we want to do better for our daughters. And I think for our sons to see, for my son to see my husband support a strong woman and a career woman, right? And picking up things at home. I think that is really going to be a difference with that generation, especially with the work that you're doing, Michele. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Make sure, ladies, to read her chapter in Rise and Find. And where else can they find you, Michele?
You can go to gantrykids.com and then How Not to Ruin Your Kids. So there's a subset off of Gantry Kids that you can find me there.
And that's the biggest thing. We just don't want to ruin our kids.
No, I just want them to be alive at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And thriving and to explore, to be curious and to find what's going to be unique to them. That's going to for their future. Yeah. So thank you so much, Michele. It's been a pleasure having you on the show tonight, Women Behind the Millions. Thank you to all of our viewers supporting the show as it continues to grow. And we will see you next week on another episode of Women Behind the Millions. Hey, money queens, looking to get your wealth to that next level, 7, 8, 9 figures? Follow us on Instagram at PinkFixMyMoney and at Women's Wealth Boutique for more millionaire money tips.